Before getting into the sound of these two new UHQRs from Analog Productions, Bill Evans, Sunday at the Village Vanguard, and Bill Evans Trio, Waltz for Debbie. Let's get into the UHQR process a little bit and what makes it such a special vinyl product. Each UHQR comes with a full explanation of what makes a UHQR an ultra high quality record. The process began in Japan in the 1980s and has since been used by Mobile Fidelity, Reference Recordings, Mark Levinson Records, but Chad Cass and Analog Productions now own the trademark. They own the patent for UHQR, and they go through all the painstaking work in Salinas, Kansas, and there are several things that set this apart, but beyond the fact that the UHQR is a 45 RPM process, and I believe I'm correct in saying that a 45 RPM record has wider grooves, perhaps easier tracking, better, more improved resolution. What they also have is something they call the flat profile. And the way Chad explains it, and the way this booklet explains it, is that an average record actually isn't flat. It pitches in. So, because of anti-skating force, the cartridge is being pulled back and forth as it tracks. With a totally flat profile, that's not a problem. It's flat all the way. They also use the off-white vinyl, which doesn't have the black footprint. We're also used to the carbon black. They believe that this, well, they've done tests. Soundsmith has done tests that says it's much quieter than your average vinyl record. These are made manually, pressed one at a time, one by one, and all this adds up to a $150 price tag, which is pretty steep when you think about it. But if you really love these records, or if these are records you cherish and hold close to your heart, $150 is not much, I think, actually, in the long run. I don't believe these are limited edition, but I'm sure that at some point or another you will not be able to find them. I previously reviewed Steely Dan Gaucho, rather Steely Dan Asia. I hope to review Gaucho, Countdown to Ecstasy, and Can't Buy a Thrill from Steely Dan. And I found all three of those records to vastly improve upon the original. The originals, because everything is sort of condensed, everything is almost closer to the ground, do have kind of a more earthy sound, but that just may be something I've grown up with and that I attach sentimentally to the history of listening to records. But there is, hands down, no doubt about it, I don't care who's reviewing these, there is so much more clarity and information and air around all the instruments. It is like, it's just really, really obvious. I know some people don't like the UHQRs. Michael Fremer has, I think he didn't like Pretzel Logic. I haven't heard Pretzel Logic, but to me Pretzel Logic was kind of a murky pressing to begin with. The first Steely Dan record is beautifully recorded. The second one, not so much. I haven't heard the Pretzel Logic UHQR, but the I associate that more with the sound of the first Steely Dan record. Obviously, Asia is a benchmark. I haven't heard Gaucho, which might be a little clinical and closer to something like Donald Fagen Nightfly. But we are getting off the point. We can't talk about the Bill Evans Trio without talking about the great Scott Lafaro and Bob Blumenthal's excellent liner notes that are duplicated for each of these box sets. Waltz for Debbie and Sunday at the Village Vanguard are essentially taken from the same day in 1961, an afternoon and an evening session. He points out that the correct pronunciation of Scott Lafaro's name is Lafaro, and I looked up a Bill Evans video where he pronounces Paul Motian's name as Paul Modian, so I will take those as the final word on the correct pronunciations. But Scott Lafaro was such an incredible innovator, and no one really plays like that today. Well, it's not true, actually. I'll go into that in a little bit. But he didn't just play walking time. Even though there was a point while he was in the Bill Evans Trio where Bill got sick, so Lafaro took gigs with took up work with Benny Goodman and other more straight-ahead, more traditional players. I'm sure he walked in those situations. He would have had to, or he got fired. But in this particular situation with Bill Evans, where they were all dedicated to the idea of improvisation, he sort of infrequently walks. He's constantly embellishing, constantly commenting on Bill Evans' piano, constantly coming up with ideas. He plays cut time, he plays triplets, he plays note clusters, he plays odd note grouping note clusters, and his tone is just phenomenal. One of the greatest bass tones I've ever heard. And as Blumenthal states, Sunday at the Village Vanguard, upon Bill Evans' wishes, was really a tribute record to Scott Lafaro. So you hear a lot of him soloing. They cover 2 of his compositions. Waltz for Debbie is more of a true trio record, and of these 2, if you're going to choose one, I would probably purchase Waltz for Debbie, even though they're both astonishing. But Lafaro was a prodigy, to say the least, but he didn't start playing bass till he was 19. Before that, he played piano, bass clarinet, and tenor saxophone. He only took up the bass because he had to have a stringed instrument where he was attending school. And he rose rapidly through the ranks. He played with Victor Feldman. His first recorded performance is the arrival of Victor Feldman with Stan Levy on drums, I believe. Victor Feldman, the great vibraphonist. He also worked with Cal Tjader and the Stan Getz Sextet. And before these 2 live records, he had played on Bill Evans' Portraits and Explorations in Jazz. We lionize Bill Evans, rightly so, because he really revolutionized the way trios play piano trio jazz. Heard most directly today in the work of Keith Jarrett and Brad Meldau. Those guys go directly back to Bill Evans. And before Bill Evans, there were obviously great piano trios like Teddy Wilson and Oscar Peterson, Ahmed Jamal, many piano trios, but there was something obviously unique about what Bill Evans did. And I know at the Jazz Record Center, our 2 top-selling artists are Coltrane and Miles Davis, followed very quickly by Bill Evans. The Riverside titles are impossible to keep in stock. They do not stay in stock. The Verve titles a little less so, and all the record store day titles fly out of the store. So he is one of the greatest artists in jazz because of his lyricism, in my opinion, his introspection, his sense of beauty, his beautiful touch, his incredible flow of ideas. And this trio with Paul Motian, I feel funny saying Motian, but that is the correct pronunciation. Motian is really the glue that holds everything together, while the other 2 are sort of floating among the stars. Particularly, I mean, even Bill Evans is kind of an anchor for Scott Lafaro's ideas that are so full and non-stop. I mean, he's very incredibly conversational. And I go back again to his tone is just, it's a thing of beauty. I mean, if you listen to the records that followed with Eddie Gomez, Gomez was, in my opinion, trying to do what Lafaro did so easily and it came so naturally to him, and it doesn't quite work. And also by the time they get in the 70s, Eddie Gomez is sort of plagued with the stick-on microphones they used to use instead of a full microphone. Those pickup attachment mics were absolutely horrible. All you hear is like the grain of the wood and the attack of the strings. You don't hear the body of the instrument. And just, you know, who would want to walk in Scott Lafaro's footsteps anyway? If you just focus on his work on Sunday at the Village Vanguard, it is just astounding. Of course, he died in a car crash. Apparently he liked to drive too fast. Steve Coons said they were in a group together, and he drove really fast, and he fell asleep at the wheel somewhere in upstate New York on Route 520. And I think the only way they could identify his body, because it was so badly burned, is they found the Christopher medal that he always wore, St. Christopher medal. And his sister wrote a really great biography of him. I read a review of it online, and just a tragic, incredible loss. And it's funny that no one really carried on what Scott Lafaro did. They perhaps tried to, people like Gary Peacock and Eddie Gomez, obviously. But Lafaro just existed in some extremely high plane. So even though he wasn't walking, that sense and that pulse is still there, and there's no sense of loss. And on the trio record with Motian, Motian is the glue keeping everything together. And it's also interesting because Motian basically sounds like the same guy he did near the end of his life, but condensed in more of a straight ahead shuffling format. He very infrequently played ding ding da ding ding da ding ding da ding. He straight eighths on the cymbal, or on the snare drums when he's playing brushes. Beautiful brush work, but he really encapsulated the entire rhythmic impetus and pulse of that trio. So let's get into the sound of these two a little bit. I think they sound fantastic. They sound remarkable. Now, the bass and the drums are given the most full resolution, top to bottom, full bandwidth. The piano must have been very, very hard to record in the 70s because we hear such poor examples of it on most Blue Note records. And it suffers the same consequences here, even though it's in the Village Vanguard, which is an extremely intimate room. When people come to the store or they come to visit New York and they say, what jazz club should I go to? First and foremost, you go to the Mecca, which is the Village Vanguard. You can feel the vibes of the greats that have played there through all these years. It's in the famous photo of Evans, Lafaro, and Modion backstage is exactly like it was then. That's the dressing room. It's back where the ice machine is, back behind the bar. It's an L-shaped room, it's a basement, it's very strange, but it has incredible acoustics. Today you can get beautiful recordings of piano, but not so much back in the day. But as a trio and as an improvising unit, these guys are still beyond compare, which is why these records still sell incredibly well. And of course, you get the nice heavy plating, you get the warm leatherette spine. People complain about this packaging, but if you want, you can just, take out the jacket, which now is beautiful gatefold, matte finish, which means you have to be a little more careful with it, because unlike a laminated finish, the matte finish will pick up all the thumbprints and all the grease off of your hands. But of course it comes with this. It comes with the great liner notes by Bob Blumenthal. Comes with UHQR tchotchkes, more Analog Productions tchotchkes, and then within a plastic sleeve, within these beautiful quality record pressings inner sleeves, we have the off-white, not clear, but off-white vinyl, which they claim is much quieter than black vinyl. It lacks the carbon black. So the packaging is beautiful on each of these. I'm not sure how I really feel about the how massive they are, these boxes, but I will tell you one thing, they're very easy to find in your apartment, or at least they are for me, because I can always see them. And the same with the Waltz for Debbie box, warm leatherette spine. These are heavy duty boxes, big sleeves, and I'll show you this jacket. Again, it's non-laminated, it's matte. The UHQR, the pressing for Village Vanguard, the album has more of a textured feel. This is fully a slick matte feel with expanded versions of those same photos. I enjoy a certain rarefied position, I understand that, and that I review insanely priced gear for Stereophile magazine. For this review of listening to these records, I'm using a pair of Voxative Ampegio speakers, a new airtight amplifier, a Rogue Audio RP7, which is not that insane, about $5 in this world, a VPI Avenger Direct turntable with a Hana Umami Blue cartridge I'm reviewing for Stereophile. So I can hear these records in their absolute purity and beauty. And on my system, both these records have an absolute massive soundstage. The scale is just tremendous. And the bass does have some overhang, but his tone is so beautiful and so rich, and the definition is quite good. The drums are perhaps, you don't hear a bass drum, of course. Nobody mic'd bass drums back in the day, even though jazz drummers always, if they're really a true jazz drummer, they feather the bass drum. So you're sort of feeling the pulse, even if you're not really hearing it. Someone like Kenny Washington or Marvin Smitty Smith, Reggie Quinterly, they're masters of that sort of a thing. But you don't hear the low bass drum, but you hear all the beauty of his brushwork, his cymbals, and sometimes the cymbals cast sort of an aura over the top of these recordings, as well does the audience. You can definitely hear the audience. They're humming and murmuring behind. I mean, it's funny to think Bill Evans playing on a Sunday afternoon at a bar in New York City, largely providing background music, and there is applause, but it's not heavy applause. The afternoon crowds are just there to have a drink. I don't think the Vanguard does afternoon crowds anymore. But the music is so pristine and so beautiful, and these songs we know so well. My Foolish Heart, Waltz for Debbie, Detour Ahead, My Romance, Some Other Time, Milestones, which he had played probably in some configuration with Miles Davis. It's close to the original in the way it's performed, but they bring so much to it. I don't need to run over each of these tunes, but suffice to say that it's a brilliant performance. It's very quiet, very lush, and while it is very, very introspective, it's also very lyrical and very upbeat in places. There's a lot of joy in this music. And after Lafaro died, it was months before Bill Evans was ready to play again, and someone made a video, there was a comment, there was an article back in the day that referred to Bill Evans as the longest suicide in history. That he never recovered from losing Scott Lafaro. Even though he went on to make some great records, these records are so singular. They're very simple in a way, and they're extremely pure, what you're hearing. You know, a group back in that day had tons of work. They're working all the time. This Sunday afternoon. They're not heavily thinking about it. They're caught up in the joy of improvisation. And I know the three of them, they knew they were doing something different, something unique, because they had decided upon it. They wanted to do more lyrical, more improvisationally based approach. And that fired everyone. I mean, listen to any Keith Jarrett Trio album with Gary Peacock and Jack DeJohnette, and you'll hear that in spades. Brad Mehldau, his rhythm sections are a little more, they're not as colorful and as creative, but Brad Mehldau is entirely out of Bill Evans, adding nothing to it as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Keith Jarrett had a wilder flights of fancy and maybe more overall technique, but without Bill Evans, you don't have Keith Jarrett. And he just really tapped a nerve, you know, the idea of beauty, lyricism, introspection, loss. There's something even, dare say, holy about this music because it is crystalline and there's so much pinpoint idealism in the music. It's a moment frozen in time, both of these records. So I highly recommend both of these things, especially if you're a Bill Evans fan. You will just hear so much more of what's on the recording. I do have an OJC of Sunday at the Village Vanguard here somewhere, but it's an 80s OJC. There is just no comparison. I don't have some of the other pressings, but the UHQRs of Steely Dan blew away all the other pressings I had, except in the case of Asia. The Japanese Asia actually had better tone overall. But if you're referring to spatiality, soundstage size, resolution, detail, air, there's so much more air around the instruments than on my OJC copy. It's just unmistakable, and there's just no way you can not hear it. You know, once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. So anyway, hope you enjoyed my overview. It's a hot day here in New York City. I'm a little verklempt. Thanks for checking in.